Coming up, the UK's membership of the European Union gave us so many benefits that we've now lost through Brexit. It's so important to keep talking about Brexit, to keep the pressure on Keir Starmer and the Labour government to prioritise a route back to EU membership. The EU isn't perfect, but its sole purpose is to maximise the long-term social, economic and security interests of its 27 member countries. Reapplying for membership of the EU is Britain's best defence against the political, economic, environmental and security threats posed by a rapidly changing world. Stay tuned. Like it or not, the UK is trapped by geography. Take a gander at any globe and you'll find Britain and Ireland loitering about 26 miles off the European mainland. And that inescapable fact means that despite Brexit, EU countries remain our nearest neighbours, at least for another few million years. Yet since Brexit, we're no longer taking full advantage of that proximity. In what way, Rob, you may ask? Well, thanks for asking. Here's my roundup of the costs of Brexit, or in other words, what could potentially be regained if Keir Starmer's Labour government were genuine about starting the long process of convincing the European Union to consider a membership application from the UK. Trade. Before Brexit, Britain enjoyed full, unfettered access to the largest trading bloc in the world. And by that, I don't mean just no tariffs on trade, but also no non-tariff barriers either. No Brexit red tape. London, Lisbon, Leipzig, Lyon or Ljubljana, they were all equally accessible. Just throw your wares into your van or lorry and off you popped. No queues, no reams of paperwork. Frictionless borders across the European Union meant that no admin was required and no bureaucratic delays like those we have now. Brexit allowed for efficient, just-in-time production, with importers and exporters not having to factor in unexpected bureaucratic delays. And talking of trade, as a member of the EU, the UK benefited from free trade deals with over 70 countries around the world, including Japan, Canada, South Korea and New Zealand. Had we remained a member, the Mercosur bloc in South America would also have been added to that list. And sure, the succession of Brexity Tory governments tried to replace these deals with equivalents. After Brexit, the UK signed trade deals and agreements in principle with about 70 countries. But the majority of these are simply rollovers, meaning they copied the terms of deals the UK previously had when it was an EU member, rather than creating new trading arrangements. It's not for nothing that the then International Secretary was known as Liz Cut-and-Paste Truss. And other deals are with countries with which the UK does very little trade indeed. Some of Truss's deals, like those with Australia and New Zealand, have been criticised for giving unfettered access to the UK market, undercutting domestic farmers and other producers, in return for diddly squat. Such was the desperation of Boris Johnson's Brexit government to be seen to be signing any new trade deal, however crappy, after leaving the EU. And still on trade, I'm always conscious in my choice of the words Britain or the UK of course being the United Kingdom of Britain and Northern Ireland. Before Brexit, there were wide open borders between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and between Northern Ireland and Britain, with no customs checks or extra paperwork needed. After a great deal of hassle, Rishi Sunak did manage to come up with a partial solution to the problems left by Boris Johnson's oven-ready deal, with his broken promises of no border in the Irish Sea. But as a result, we now see labels on supermarket products saying, "Not for EU," which was part of Sunak's workaround solution for no customs checks at the Irish land border. And talking of Northern Ireland, Brexit also meant the loss of European Union support for the Good Friday Agreement and the Irish peace process. Northern Ireland benefited from over €1.5 billion of peace funding from the EU from 1995 right up until Brexit. Which brings us on to the next area of Brexit impact, European Union funding. As well as that €1.5 billion of funding for the Northern Ireland peace process, the EU also provided financial support for rural areas throughout Britain. To take just one example from down here in the southwest of England, Cornwall received £1 billion from the EU between the year 2000 and 2020 as one of the poorest regions in Europe. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund, set up by the Tories to replace this EU finance, allocated a measly £1.32 million for the first 3 years. £44 million per year. to replace the average 50 million a year from the EU. Then there's disaster relief funding, such as the 60 million euros the UK received for flood relief in 2017. Then there's EU structural funding, such as when Liverpool received £2 billion for urban regeneration, and EU funding to support the British film industry, theatre and music, plus training courses for the unemployed funded from the European Social Fund. All gone. Security and power. The EU is one of the three global economic superpowers alongside the USA and China, and would be even more powerful if the UK was still a member. Isolated, insular, post-Brexit Britain is no longer a major player on the world stage. While an EU member, the UK was also part of a stronger, united front against a resurgent Russia. One of the founding impulses of the EU was to avoid war in Europe, and some commentators claim that Brexit, and the subsequent loss of European unity, was one of the catalysts for Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. Then there's the loss of cooperation on security issues and access to shared crime and terrorism databases, plus participation in the European arrest warrant, which allowed for the speedy capture and extradition of criminals throughout the EU. Rights and freedoms. For me, the very worst aspect of Brexit was the loss of rights, the loss of the freedom for UK citizens to travel, work, study and retire anywhere in the European Union. No long queues at airports and seaports, no worries about keeping track of 90 days in every 180, no worries around business travel. And by the same token, the loss of the freedom for our EU friends to travel, work, study and retire here in the UK. My own business as a theatrical agency was suddenly unable to supply British actors to European theatres or to Hollywood movies being shot in Eastern Europe because the red tape involved meant it was easier for those guys to recruit from the Republic of Ireland or other English-speaking EU citizens. Check out my video where I discuss this with the casting director at the English Theatre of Hamburg, who also lost his job because of Brexit. We also lost free movement for musicians and instruments, bands and equipment, artists and materials. There was a simple, generous system of fixed compensation for flight delays and cancellations, thanks to EU passenger rights. Again, lost to Brexit. EU-wide data, call and text roaming at home rates. No surcharges before Brexit, but the majority of mobile carriers have imposed them since. Another trivial but annoying right we lost was access to your home content on streaming services like Netflix and Spotify, wherever you travelled in the EU. We also lost certain consumer protections, including protections on cross-border shopping. We also lost enhanced human rights protection, especially against the state, through the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. For employees, the EU provided a baseline of worker protections, including limits on maximum hours worked, maternity leave periods, annual leave, protection against discrimination, and many other employment rights. Collaboration. The UK after Brexit lost access to many collaborative schemes that have piled on the costs of developing our own insular, less cost-effective and isolated alternatives. These include participation in the EU single energy market, enhancing the resilience of our energy supply, one of the reasons why we suffered particularly badly during the recent energy price hikes. Then there's the Galileo space project, the GPS satellite cluster, including access to its high-quality military signal. Britain left the project on its departure from the EU, and its third country status means British companies can no longer be involved in the EU space programme in the way they once were. Participation in the Erasmus student exchange programme was also lost through Brexit. It involves more than 4,000 universities across 31 countries, and before Brexit, more than 15,000 UK students a year took advantage of the ability to affordably study in other EU member countries. And beyond these targeted programmes, there's the wider issue of global corporate taxation. Cross-border tax collaboration aimed at holding massive corporations like Amazon, Facebook and Apple to account achieves far more than any one country acting alone could ever hope to. That opportunity also now gone post-Brexit. Then there was quicker access to safe new medicines thanks to a one-stop pan-EU medical testing regime. Participation in the European Capital of Culture programme, which gave a boost to cities like Glasgow and Liverpool. Gone. Mutual recognition of academic and many professional qualifications, meaning anyone qualified in the UK or in an EU country could rely on their qualification anywhere within the EU or UK. Not so now. The environment. The EU mandates minimum environmental protections. Individual EU member countries can't diverge below EU standards, but can enhance them further. The same is true of food hygiene standards. No hormone-fed beef, chlorinated chicken and so on. Our post-Brexit Tory governments trashed environmental standards in our waterways and with respect to herbicides and insecticides. Before Brexit, there was a single system of chemical regulation, REACH, to improve human, animal and environmental safety around chemicals. But since Brexit, firms now have to register with both REACH and UK REACH, doubling the costs and admin for manufacturers. And the biggest Brexit lies. The poster boys of Brexit are fishermen, lost the right to land fish in any EU port, along with an easy process for declaring catches. EU countries used to buy more than half of all fish caught by UK fishermen before Brexit. That's no longer the case. Then there's all those Polish citizens that Brexitists in Lincolnshire and other places were so concerned about. I'm married to one of them. Those Brexitists' fear of people speaking in foreign languages on public transport led to the loss of access to a willing seasonal workforce to pick our fruit and vegetables. The result? Millions of pounds worth of crops rotting in British fields. Thank you, Brexitists. And take back control, sovereignty in it. We lost having a major say in the running of the European Union, with MEPs representing the UK and the European Parliament, British judges and the European Court of Justice, and the right to propose and amend new EU legislation. We're now rule takers, not rule makers. And you know, I could go on and on. There are 88 more items on the list I prepared for this video, which is already overrunning, but maybe I'll save them for a future video. The point I want to make, though, is that the UK will never undo Brexit, by which I mean we could never get back all the special dispensations, the rebates and the overall deal we once had as an EU member. That's all gone thanks to the Brexitists. But all these things I've talked about in this video can be ours once more. Keir Starmer and his government should cease with the "not in my lifetime" rhetoric and take every action they can to educate the public, mend relations with the European Union, fully keep the promises we made as part of the Brexit agreement, ensure compliance with all EU regulations and start the lengthy process of applying for EU membership as soon as possible.